Before we start, I have a question of the chair.
Sure.
Earlier, Senator Schumer, the majority leader, had requested a response from Republican members of this committee as to things that were happening in Georgia. When is the appropriate time that I can respond as he requested?
You could respond right now, Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Senator Schumer's question was, he was wondering why on Sundays Georgia would not participate in an electoral process of gathering signatures, of registration and things on Sunday. And I would just like to respond to that. Georgia's a southern state just like Mississippi. I cannot speak for Georgia, but I can speak for Mississippi on why we would never do that on a Sunday or hold an election on a Sunday. You know, this is our currency. This is a dollar bill. This says, the United States of America, in God we trust. Etched in stone in the U.S. Senate chamber is in God we trust. When you swore in all of these witnesses, the last thing you said to them in your instructions was, so help you God. In God's word in Exodus 20:18, it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So that is my response to Senator Schumer. Thank you, Madam Chairman. And now I will begin with my questions. Also, I have a letter that I would like to have entered into the record. You know, I'm really concerned how this legislation would negatively affect the integrity of the election system. And I recently received a letter from our Secretary of State in Mississippi, Michael Watson, and he was concerned that the various provisions in this act provide new pathways for election fraud and undermine the First Amendment right to free speech through censorship of campaign activity and restrict states' authority to conduct local elections. So given Secretary Watson's role as Mississippi's chief election officer, I would ask that the entire letter from Secretary Watson be entered into the record.
Without objection, entered in the record.
One of the specific concerns raised by Secretary Watson was the bill's effect on Mississippi's voter ID law. Voter ID was adopted by the people of Mississippi in 2011, and not only did we adopt it, we made it an amendment to the state constitution. It was passed by an overwhelming margin, and the voter ID has been implemented with success in Mississippi. We've provided government issue ID, free to cost our citizens not only to vote, but any other thing that they might need a government ID for. Our secretary at that time, Delbert Hoseman, worked closely with the Obama Justice Department, and beginning in the drafting of the phases of the enabling law through the final implementation. The result of this collaboration is that Mississippi's voter ID law is working successfully, while such policies in other states have been embroiled in extensive litigation. However, the legislation before us today would nullify Mississippi's successful voter ID law. Under S1 in a federal election, an individual could walk into a polling place, register, and vote on the spot without ever showing any proof of identity or residency, and for that matter, of age. Mr. Rakita, I'm going to put this one to you. How would allowing individuals to register and vote in a federal election without ever confirming their identity or residency lead to further undermining voter confidence?
Well, thank you, Senator. Yeah, the implications are obvious. More cheating, more potential for abuse. Couple that with aggressive ballot harvesting, as this bill promotes and doesn't allow prohibitions against. You can see where all this is going. I go back to what Leader McConnell said during his opening remarks, which was true when we all implemented the Help America Vote Act about 20 years ago. And it improved the process because it was bipartisan. Yes, make it easier to vote, but make it harder to cheat. Senator, what this bill does, and by the way, I don't take the premise that it's hard to vote. There has to be some basic responsibilities for the individual in a free republic. And one of those has to be taking reasonable, common sense initiatives to cast your ballot. We can continue to improve upon that, of course. And I think one of the huge avenues we can continue to explore is technology. But if you don't couple that improvement of the voting process, like using technology, with individual responsibility and accountability, then all you're doing is making it easier to cheat. So where the Help America Vote Act was, yes, let's make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. This bill is let's make it easier to cheat, period.
And I agree with you on that. I just did a press conference and referenced Jennifer Jackson in Brookhaven, Mississippi, who called me. She had gone to vote, and she was told, you can't vote, you've already voted. And she saw where someone had signed her name. She looked above it, and her deceased father had already voted that morning as well. So the fact that voter fraud is prevalent, it is rampant, and in close elections, it does make a difference. I've got just a few minutes, or 1 minute. This bill would also create a complicated multi-ballot system for states like Mississippi, as you referred to. Giving that voter ID as part of our state constitution, the state will still have to require voter ID for voting on state and local issues, even if the law prohibits it for federal elections. This would create a system of multi-ballots and conflicting rules, which will make voting much more complex and time-consuming for voters and those running our elections. If our goal is to reduce wait times at the polls, this multi-ballot system, combined with the same-day voter registration, would drastically increase the amount of time it takes to vote. Secretary Warner, how will the conflicts between this bill and state law create problems and make voting more difficult in West Virginia?
Well, I think West Virginia is very similar, as you described the process and the people in Mississippi. I think I was hearing and seeing the people in West Virginia in a similar light. And so this process of automatic or the same-day registration and net voting is the thing that the clerks mentioned to me the most that was going to complicate their administration of the elections. And then the ID does not present problems. I found it ironic that on this morning's news there was talking about bringing your ID to get a COVID shot. We're requiring people to bring an ID to get a COVID shot, but says that it's a problem to vote. No, people don't have problems. We implemented voter ID just a couple years ago ourselves in West Virginia. No problems whatsoever with the implementation. No complaints. In fact, people would typically come into the polling precinct and hand people their ID before they were even asked, because that was the expectation. And so when we have the voter identification laws, it adds confidence to the process. So this bill complicates the entire process, going in the wrong direction from where we need to go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Sure, thank you.
I yield.